because I was able to see their chair at the top of their desk. So hi, how are you?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
Good, good, good. Gosh, crazy days getting back into the real world, isn't it? Like just
Yeah,
getting kids out the door.
it's kind of surreal in a way. I've still got one at home because we've got one doing the HSC. So yeah, he's at home doing that. So
Yeah, so
yeah,
Larissa, it's three kids, isn't it? So how old are your
yeah,
kids?
yeah. So I've got a 20-year-old. I don't know if I can classify her as a kid anymore. 17 and a 12.
Hmm.
So yeah, I'm
And
covering university, high school, and primary school. So I've got it all covered.
and Narembeen family. How long have you guys been in Narembeen?
I think overall we had a 3-year break, as you know. I think it's around 24 years now, something like that.
Oh
So
gosh.
yeah,
Okay.
my husband knows the date, so I'm not good. It just feels like a long time. Yeah,
So definitely a local though, Larissa. Like this is very
yeah,
much your home and it's where your heart is. And I know, I really admire you've been such a vocal community advocate and campaigner for our community, particularly in the last few years. But before we go into what you're working on now and the kind of voice
sure.
you're trying to be now,
Yeah,
help everyone understand a little bit about yourself. So your background and what's kind of
sure.
brought you to this point in your life.
Yeah, yeah, strangely. So I guess my technical type of background is I've got a biotechnology management background. I actually went into management consulting and eventually into auditing and looking at best practice, looking at risk assessments, and particularly in the scientific areas. So I've actually audited lots and lots of different businesses across New South Wales and Australia. In my career side of things, I've done a lot of community work and work with youth, and I'm also the president of the Narembeen Progress Association, which some people go, "What's a Progress Association?" It's been going since 1901. I'm very proud to say, which is amazing.
Wow.
One of the earliest. It is the earliest one in Willoughby, and it's really about bringing together the local community and working together on what outcomes we want to see for the area. So whether that's giving feedback on DAs or working with council on environmental issues and things like that. I'm also on the PNC at Canberra Public School, so I'm heavily involved with kids and things there and what's going on there, and also I chair the environmental and sustainability group there as well. So I've got my fingers in different community pies, I guess you could say.
Oh, but that's great. I mean,
Yeah,
as we said, clearly you're very committed to our community and wanting to make sure that things are done really well. And I mean, I guess that
yeah,
brings us to, your and my chat today. I know for a long time you've been um, a really strong advocate in our community for, infrastructure projects that are done well. And
yeah.
yet at the moment you have concerns about, one that's coming through. Can you
Yeah.
tell me and everyone that's listening about, where you're coming from now and what your concerns are around the project?
Sure. Well, it's a complex project, so that's always the hard part of it. But so the Western Harbour Tunnel and Warringah Freeway Upgrade Project and the Beaches Link or Hill Expressway, they're the formal names of it. I think a lot of people just think of it as the Beaches Link. It's a project that I was asked to get involved with because the school community started to have real concerns about how it was going to impact kids and how we could maybe work with a state government and council to mitigate some of those. And that evolved, I guess, into broader concerns about the project from that sort of basis. So we didn't start with the basis of this project doesn't make sense. We actually started with the basis of, okay, how can we work with this and what's it going to mean for our kids? I guess there's a few things that have evolved from that. It's been a very long process of giving feedback to the government. We've had a petition that went in, there was 11,000 signatures asking for a
Wow, that's
review
great.
of it. We have just had a parliamentary inquiry, and that came directly out of our group and our advocacy for the project to be looked at closer. Um, so essentially, I guess you could categorise the issues as there's really significant environmental issues, and I've had people say, "Oh, well, there's always environmental issues with big projects," and that's true to an extent, but this is really significant. The things that we're concerned about here, there's issues around intergenerational equity and kids. There's issues around accountability and transparency, around climate and sustainability. So there's quite a breadth of issues, and also issues around heritage and Aboriginal heritage as well. So Yeah, there's quite a lot there. I guess from an environmental perspective, a lot of people don't realise what's going to happen is that the project's going to come across from poor old Rozelle that's already been hit by all the WestConnex and construction. It's going to come across Sydney Harbour, and it's going to be an immersed tube, which involves dredging harbour. The issue with that really came out during the inquiry is that it's one of the most contaminated locations. It's where the old shipbuilding works used to happen. You've got petroleum sites there. There's all sorts of things that contribute to contaminants being encapsulated on the seafloor, and dredging up the seafloor in that location has many, many risks. And I think a lot of the experts that have testified have said that really the risks are under-assessed and the mitigation strategies are under-reviewed. And that just means in a project where you've got significant cost involved and a cost-benefit ratio that's quite marginal, there are real concerns about how will that be managed, and can it be managed effectively and in a cost-effective manner that doesn't sort of destroy the environment in the meantime. So there's many endangered species that have been identified as being at risk from this project and this process. And it continues on into, I guess, if you think about our foreshores, especially on the North Shore, you've got kind of these peninsulas that run off into the harbour. So essentially we're all part of that harbour ecosystem. So we've got a major site at Canberra that is being dug up at the moment. People might drive past that and have a look at it. And we've several groups, as well as the schools, have been raising concerns about the way contaminants are being managed there. And that runs off down Willoughby Creek and into Middle Harbour. Flat Rock Gully is going to be used as major dive site, and we know that that's seriously contaminated, if there's a criteria to say seriously, but it's a very old industrial tip that had refrigerant factory on the edge, and it was dumped. We know asbestos was put down there, all sorts of things, which they're actually finally doing cordial testing now to fully sort of scope out what are the contaminants. But the thing is, we seem to be chicken and egg. We sort of choose a site, and then way down the track things are getting tested for and assessed. And so from a risk management point of view, that's very problematic, and from a cost management point of view, it's problematic. Then they're going to go across Middle Harbour and dredge that as well. And so all that work's going to go for between, depending on which site you're at, or close to between 6 to 10 years of works, of early works plus the project works. So it's a long time for all of that to be happening and I guess that's where we come to the kids issue, is that these kids, in particular Rozelle already, we've got generations of kids that are going to be living around really serious construction works that are going to be needed to be managed. It's something like 10,000 at the peak, 10,000 vehicle movements a day needed just to construct the project.
Just for the project?
Yeah. So if you put it all together, they're kind of starting to stage it out a bit more now, I think, because they've realised from community feedback that is really too much. But even still, the density of the area and trying to bring these two, basically they're bringing Western Harbour Tunnel and Beaches Link Tunnel into the Ringa Freeway in the densest area of schools in Sydney. So we've sort of added up the numbers, and minimum 20,000 kids, and that is at bare minimum, because that's just adding up the number of schools and the number of kids they have there. And so those kids are all transversing across the area to and from, with all of this construction impact happening. But I guess from a bigger picture point of view, once all that's done, there's all sorts of concerns, I guess, around pollution, around what are we doing in terms of building in greater car reliance in Sydney. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And at the moment, you might have seen in the media, and the inquiry talked about this, is that Sydney now has the most extensive kilometres wise of toll roads in the world. And I think a lot of people
have heard that.
Yeah, it's our badge of honour. So we're the second biggest coal exporter, and we're the largest builder of toll roads. So if you sort of start to put those sorts of things together and think, well, what are we doing from a policy perspective and from a planning perspective, about how and this is, I guess, where we started, was, okay, what's the impact on kids, and how long is all this going to take, and what's the environmental impacts? But then you start to step back and say, why are we doing this? What are going to be the benefits? What are the costs? Is this going to work? All those sorts of questions start naturally coming out of the community, and that's really what's happened and led us to a parliamentary inquiry, essentially, to try and get to the bottom. And one of the things we asked for with the petition was for the business cases to be released, because I think the community got to the point where it was like, you know, if we're going to spend, now the numbers keep going up. I think it started at 12 billion, now we're up to somewhere in the range of $20 billion. If we're going to spend that sort of money.
Sorry, Larissa, is that for both? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're quoting, I think the Beaches link in 2017, around the time of the sort of by-elections and things when it was announced, was quoted at about 3 billion in the media. And these numbers have never been released to the public through Parliament or the upper house or anything like that. It's just sort of leaks to the media, so that we've got to go on that. But they haven't been, you know, the government's never said, no, that's not the correct cost. So it started off as about 3 billion. The Beaches links up to about 10 now. That's been announced through the government. Right. So, you know, these costs are just already sort of blowing out, if you like, way past what the community expected them to be. And then you've got all of these additional concerns and experts saying, we haven't assessed this risk and you haven't assessed that risk. And we found there's some really serious things. I don't know if you know about the Westgate tunnel in Melbourne, where it's been held up, and Transurban just had their AGM, and lots of questions were asked about this, because it's had a mighty impact in terms of the local community, in terms of contractors, and basically there's a whole legal stash going on about whose responsibility it is as to the fact that this really serious chemical, difficult chemical to deal with and remove from the environment, called PFAS, has been found, and they didn't have a plan of where to take it, what to do with it, you know, all those sorts of things have happened. So that whole project's ground to a halt. Now they've found PFAS in Middle Harbour, in Sydney Harbour. You know, we've got it here. It's a known quantity, but we're not. We sort of seem to be going down a similar track, and that's just, you know, we need to learn from from what's happened previously and be really realistic about what these costs are going to be to build this project. So I guess that sort of brings us. Yeah, go for it.
I was just going to ask. It's like, so when did the idea of this infrastructure project, when was it first conceived of? Do you know?
Yeah, we do know. So the 1960s had the exact same alignment. There was a you know, roads and transport alignment from the 1960s that was put forward. It's come out in different sort of iterations over the years. I think in the 1980s it was sort of relined to go via Castle Crag, and that was actually knocked back because of the environmental concerns. And they're the same. I mean, we're talking about just the next bay over in terms of Middle Harbour, in the areas where there's mangroves, sensitive fish breeding habitats. You know, whales come up and bring their calves up there. Like, it's a very sensitive, we like to call it sort of the nursery for Sydney Harbour, Middle Harbour. Mm-hmm. And it's going over in essentially the same place, and that got knocked back previously. So it's sort of like the definition of insanity. We're doing the same thing over and over and trying to justify the same thing over and over, getting the same outcome.
I mean, the thing that really occurs to me is we're talking about, so this is a 1960s solution, yes, being advocated for in 2020. Actually, that to me blows my mind. So it's 60 years, and the best idea we have in terms of infrastructure planning is something that we were looking back at in 1960. And I guess what I want to make really clear here is I know, because I know you're not anti-progress in terms of our community, nor are you. When you talk, you don't talk in such a way that it makes me think you know, you're being insensitive to people's needs to be able to commute from place to place. But actually, I love the way you see this, Larissa, because, you know, you what would you do? So if you were Premier and you had the power to kind of go, okay, we need to step back from this this project, what would you do? What would you be looking at?
I think that first and foremost, I think we need to make evidence-based decisions. And given the way the planning system works, sometimes that evidence, and particularly these large projects, don't come forthwith until quite late in the process. So we have to be brave enough. The politicians need to be brave enough to say, okay, we did make a question making big political promises ahead of getting information. To be brave enough to say, actually, look, the cost benefits of this project don't add up. They really don't. And that's
on that, you were telling me, what's the ratio, the cost benefit ratio?
So for Western Harbour Tunnel, they're saying 1.2, but that's before a lot of these risks and costs. You know, there's an allowance, but we're questioning and saying hang on a minute. And a lot of that cost benefit ratio actually relies on the travel times, which many people in the community are really questioning the travel time savings that are being claimed, and they've never been validated. And the upper house actually asked for validation of them, because we're saying we already can get from there to there in that time. How is it possible? You know, all those sorts of things. But they're also looking, they add in sort of congestion relief. And one of the key things, and I'll come back to your question, sorry, about what would we do. One of the things people that's really key to understand about this project is the whole ring of freeway is being rebuilt to plug in these tunnels, essentially. And it's being reprioritised as a north-south, you know, solution, if you like. But it is actually as much an east-west distributor for the whole of the lower North Shore. And so what they're doing is they're shutting down all these, well, not shutting down, they're reprioritising all the on and off ramps. So, for example, if you normally go to Northbridge via Miller Street, you might have to come off at Willoughby Road to get to Northbridge, and that creates this huge amount of rat running. And Military Road, as a result, for example, does not improve as a result of this project. And that's been confirmed with us time and time again by Transport for New South Wales. It's been confirmed in the inquiry, it's been confirmed, and actually North Sydney Council's submission to planning, the expert transport planners there said that they think Military Road actually get worse. And that's because we're backflowing all this traffic onto surface streets, and that has an impact on pollution, which hasn't been sufficiently scoped in the project, and pushing all that traffic in and around schools, as well as the massive 30-metre stack that's going in at Canberra. So there's just to put that in context, so this I guess what I'm addressing is there's a perception that this project actually sorts out surface level traffic congestion, which the evidence shows otherwise. The data in the project shows that it makes it worse. Anzac Bridge gets worse as a result of the project. The Northern Beaches will get 18% additional traffic with the project. The delays around Balgowlah and French's Forest get worse as a result of the project. So I guess I'm looking at it from the point of view of, is it a congestion solution? And the evidence is pointing towards it not being that. The evidence is pointing towards it being a way to yes, distribute traffic across Sydney, but not necessarily, it's really moving those pinch points to different places, and it's monetising our traffic essentially. So I would look at actual solutions that address the problem, and there's a couple of, it's a multimodal approach, so sometimes that's not terribly marketable, I guess, in terms of making a single election promise of saying we're going to do this great big whopping project. But what we actually need is sustainable planning in our cities and in our inner city areas. And we need a mode shift to active and public transport. Bradfield was right, I think, when he first planned Sydney. He knew that we were going to get full, and if we planned it on the basis of cars, that was going to be really problematic. So you know, we've lost some of that space, but there's new technologies that can actually, things like light rail or the metro from Chatswood to French's Forest and possibly onto DY and Mona Vale. And I think there's been a reluctance in the past to do that, because there's a perception that that will actually create an uplift in housing developments and things like that. But I would argue that that uplift is already being planned. It's already in process. The government's already rezoned. There's already going to be more people. So we need to flip that around and say, do we want more people that are reliant on cars, or do we want more people that are going to be reliant on public transport? So what type of commuter do you want to attract to the Northern Beaches if those densities are already planned by the government? Because I would suggest that the Northern Beaches can't, it's like a funnel. So even if you have congestion around Balgowlah and French's Forest, etc., that's going to affect the whole beaches. So you really want people getting into public transport and mass transit. And there's also a kind of misdirection out there that the Northern Beaches, that the alignment can't take metro light rail, and that's been disproven by government's own documents, and we've submitted those, that it is absolutely possible and feasible to sort that corridor out. But that doesn't, a lot of people along Military Road will say, well, that doesn't sort out Military Road. In one sense it does, because what you're doing is you're mode shifting. So you're taking people that would normally use the roads to get into the city, and you're shifting a proportion of those onto public transport, and then that frees up, because there's the argument about what about tradies. Well, that frees up the road for the tradies, and one of our roads just been expanded and those sorts of things, so that creates more capacity, if you like. But there does need to be a solution around North Sydney, and I think the Western Harbour Tunnel just confounds what is already a nightmare issue around the lower North Shore, with people coming into work. And North Sydney is a major work centre in its own right. It needs to be respected as that. And actually, a lot of the trip destinations from the Northern Beaches aren't going to the city, and they're not going to the west. They're going to North Sydney, they're going to Macquarie. So we need to be fit for purpose and see where are people travelling to, so therefore create solutions around that. And I think on the North Shore, we really need that connectivity with active transport. So proper grade separated bike paths. Everyone went out and bought, all the bike shops were sold out during COVID, but people don't want to use them because it's too dangerous. It's dangerous, and it's polluted, and it's not attractive. So you need to make active transport solutions more attractive and actually have grade separated cycling. But there are things like smart motorways, which have actually already been funded across that route to a certain degree, across the bridge and to Anzac Bridge. Extend that up the Ringa Freeway, create a smart motorway, redesign those on and off ramps to recognise that there is that east-west distribution, and to make it more efficient rather than what's going to happen, which is going to make travelling around the North Shore less efficient. So be smart about it, start to actually look at some of the new technologies and new knowledge that we have around planning. And the other thing I'd say is the Northern Beaches has the greatest containment in Sydney in terms of that worker containment. So we have more than 50% of people in the Northern Beaches work on the Northern Beaches. That is sustainability. That is what we want, right? But what we're going to do is open up a great big whopping toll road to it, and bring in more and more cars, and actually reduce that containment, essentially. So what the government should be doing, if I was in government, is encourage that sustainability, invest in the work centres on the Northern Beaches, invest in the local public transport and active transport links. And one of the great things I think Rob Stokes is doing is they've just trialled on-demand transport on the Northern Beaches. I don't know if anyone's used it, but that is the next wave of transport across the world. It's in France and Spain, and I lived in Europe, so I guess I've got that sort of perspective, is that there are technologies out there that are already working that we need to employ to be smarter about how we move around and more sustainable.
Wow. Larissa, I think
a few things.
It's just a few things. I think, so thank you for sharing all of that information and for giving me that perspective on those projects. I mean, I guess there's a few things that immediately stand out to me in what you've shared today. First and foremost, there is still this question about transparency and accountability. And I acknowledge that this is at a state government level. This is not a federal, government, although I'm sure federal funding would be going into this project. But, at a state government level, there is still that unwillingness to actually share the documentation that's used to make decisions that are as important as this. So I think that's really interesting for us as a community to kind of consider. Are we happy with that as a acceptable standard? You wouldn't necessarily, if it was your own business, you certainly wouldn't accept that if your manager just came to you and said, I'm going to do this project, and no, I'm not showing you how I came up with the idea or how much it's going to cost you, I'm just going to do it. That wouldn't be something that you would expect. So I think it's really fascinating that there is still that transparency and accountability level here. The second thing that kind of, and I confess it breaks my heart a little bit, is that this still feels like this is not a forward-facing solution. This feels like, as you said, this was an easy thing to throw out there, bait them, hook them, get them. Oh, now we've got to follow through on this. But actually, brave leadership would be looking at this and going, what does our city need for the next 50 years, the next 100 years, not just now, so because I think we all have tried to navigate Military Road, and it can be a nightmare.
I used to live along it, so I know exactly the issue. But
But
I
I
think
think,
I think one of the things that people aren't recognising is when you look at the data. Sorry to be so data driven, but I've looked at a lot of it. Is actually a huge proportion of Military Road is local traffic, and that's the same as the Northern Beaches. A huge proportion is local, so you need to be looking at the local solutions. And believing, I guess, in some of those local solutions. We keep looking at these great big grand projects, thinking, right, if we just take something from here to there, but we're not actually looking at the local situation and saying, actually, this could make a massive difference. Yeah.
well,
So,
and the other thing that strikes me is that
okay.
we're still talking about car solutions here, like this, and I find that actually incredibly fascinating, because I'm certainly not against people's liberties to have their own car, to be able to go
Yeah.
where they want to be able to go when they want to go. But one of the things about living in Sydney is that it is such a beautiful city, and we are relatively all closely located. The fact that
Yep.
there aren't simple get on, get off, like the subway lines in New York and Manhattan, or in London, their amazing subway network and train network. It just actually beggars belief to me. I think that would be brave. Brave leadership would be,
Yep.
internal combustion engines are going to be a thing of the past within the next 20 years. We're going to be electric vehicles. When it comes to electric vehicles, we actually only want them on the road if they have to be on the road. So what options do we give people to actually be able to move around en masse, without having to put a key in an ignition, or press a button? And I think I just want to say thank you for being that voice and calling out this need to be future focused, to be forward focused. I think there's no doubt that this is about, economic development. It's about business development across Sydney. But my fear is, having heard you today, this is very short term thinking. I think I always look at magnificent infrastructure projects and I think of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. So when the Sydney Harbour Bridge was first conceived and constructed, motor vehicles were not a thing. Yet they still created a bridge that is 6 lanes wide. They had some
Had that
idea of what the
forethought.
future.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and
look,
forethought.
see, I think the project kind of engineers inside this project would say, they're trying to build capacity, but it's a shift in thinking, because if we just keep building capacity in one location, we just keep growing car reliance,
Yeah, yeah.
and there are all sorts of implications with that, and particularly space. We live on this peninsula city where, Bradfield, as I said, knew we were going to run out of space. So I think, and there is this intergenerational equity thing. I was talking to my 17-year-old last night, who gets a bit bored of me talking about this stuff, but he goes, when I said, the 1960s plan, he goes, why are we building something from the 1960s, Mum? You've got to be kidding me.
Unless
And he
it's
goes,
the Jetsons automobile.
oh, well, I did say we have to give everyone a DeLorean, because the travel time savings they're claiming kind of less than the time it takes to get there. But anyway, but he was sort of, his perspective, and I guess also having 3 years in Europe, knowing he can get around to see his friends really easily on public transport and bike lanes and all that kind of stuff. His perspective is, we don't want that, Mum. Our generation don't want that. Like they want to be able to hop on a metro or a light rail, or or ride a bike or whatever. They can't drive cars when they go out most of the time now anyway. So why would you want that? It's there's a real perspective, I think, amongst young people that this is madness, just building more and more roads. And I'm very supportive of EVs. I have a hybrid because that's all I can afford, but and I'm supportive of what Matt Keane and the government are doing to try and make EVs more affordable. I think it's a key piece, but I think too much reliance on EVs alone is going to sort of corner us into a more of a problem, because there is, as I said to you before, we do have poor fuel standards. We don't really have a plan to retire our ICE vehicles. That market is going to keep growing, and a lot of commentators are concerned that actually we're going to be importing the world's poorly fueled, poorly engined vehicles when they ban them. So there's countries that are banning diesel vehicles, whilst we are actually increasing our reliance on diesel. So it's quite an unusual situation to be in. And if we don't sort of arrest the ICE vehicle market, second-hand market thing, if you think of the new car market as being golf ball size, and the second-hand car market being a beach ball,
Yeah.
by the time we only get to 30% replacement of the new car market, that is very tiny percentage of the overall car market. And so in actual fact, well, we've done some modelling with engineers and things like that. Our pollution levels, our urban pollution levels are going to keep growing, and our emissions are going to keep growing. And transport emissions are our second highest growing emissions in Australia. So it's a real problem that we have to address on multiple levels, and EVs are part of that, definitely, but we need to actually plan better, knowing that we're going to grow our population, knowing more people, if they have the option, if their only option is to drive, they'll drive. But if we give them sustainable options, they'll choose those. If they're efficient, fast, clean, all those sorts of things, people will do mode shift to those so sustainable options, and we need both. Yeah,
I think you make some really, really good points, Larissa. And yeah, someone's just said, whoa, second highest comes from emissions, from vehicle emissions.
Yeah.
And I think it's these things that people don't generally know. No. You know, we don't discuss them as a community, and I think they are really important points for us to kind of take on board and consider. And I circle back to the fact that I think never before have we needed our leadership to be braver. You know, this is a turning point for our society. This is when we do want our leaders stepping up and going, right, what does a future-focused economy look like? What systems do we need to have in place? You know, what does a sustainable community look like? How are we encouraging that sustainability and renewability? What does equality look like? You know, how are we making it easy for everyone to get to where they need to be, whether they live in the northern beaches or the western suburbs? And also then, what does integrity look like? At the end of the day, are our processes, when it comes to things like this, adequate for our needs? And I think I would finish today's conversation by saying it would be so amazing to see our leaders step forward, and you and I have talked about this, to step forward and go, you know what, maybe that wasn't the right plan. So yes, we said we'd lead you, and yes, we're looking at solutions here. We thought that might be a solution, but maybe that isn't the right solution. So we're going to step back and have a, rather than this bloody mindedness that we seem to have at all levels of government, that once a decision's made, come hell or high water, that's the decision that gets.
And I think the flip side of that is also not just walking away, because that's what's happened in the past, is like they'll, with the Northern Beaches, and I could kind of hear the Northern Beaches people say, and by the way, there are a lot of groups on the Northern Beaches that have looked into the project and aren't supporting it at all, because a growing number, because they understand the environmental impacts, they understand the car issues, the traffic issues, they've looked at the documents. But I think just, in terms of, I guess, walking away versus doing something, the project was required. Every major project is supposed to have an alternatives assessment, and they sort of did a very flippant alternatives assessment. We actually did a freedom of information request to find out what they actually analysed, and it really wasn't much. And the thing is, there is information out there. There are, whether it be metro or light rails, or even a metro under Military Road, which people on Military Road will go, oh no, but actually I think is a really good idea. Just under Military Road, not even crossing, just taking the local traffic situation. There is information already scoped out there in different government departments, but it needs to be brought together. And I'm hopeful Rob Stokes has now taken on the transport and the planning portfolios, and maybe that's an opportunity actually to bring things together in a more holistic way and say, actually, what is the best solution? Not just walk away and say, oh, this is $20 billion too much, which it is, but say, what proportion of that can we carve out to say what solutions can we actually move forward with? And it's not starting again, because they already have a whole lot of things scoped out that they can have another look at and invest in, and then say, okay, the rest of the money probably does need to go to Western Sydney. I mean, that's the biggest growth area in terms of population. It needs to be addressed. So I think there's opportunities that the community will accept and understand, so long as they don't just walk away and say, oh, it's all too hard again, which is what's happened in the past. So I'm not advocating for stop it, forget it, dump it, walk away. I'm saying, there's some great options here that the community, I think, are prepared to really get behind. So let's talk and let's try and make those things happen.
Wow, how logical and how practical. And I'm sorry, I've definitely finished my cup of tea, Larissa, and I'm mindful that
Mine's
I'm
gone
sure
cold.
everyone's got work desks to get back to and stuff. But thank you for sharing all of that information today. I mean, I will say, if there was one thing you would ask anyone listening today that might like to know more about what it is you're talking about, or how they could get involved, or what they should do, where should they go?
Yeah.
What should they look into?
Hop on and like or follow the Stop the Tunnels Facebook page, and then from there you can find links to things. And yeah, especially I think right now it's really writing to government ministers and the Premier and telling them what you prefer to see for Sydney, because they're making those decisions, and that's really important.
And on that note, that's where I'll finish it. I actually think, guys, what I've heard Larissa say today, and I know actually there's been criticism of these efforts in the past around, well, it's only a one solution, stop it. That's not what I've heard today. What I've actually heard today is a really impassioned plea for our leaders to actually be looking at what our community really needs, both here in the now, but also what it'll need in the next 50 to 70 years. And if embraced that way, this is an exciting opportunity to reimagine what our community could look like and what it might need into the future. So yeah, let's ditch a 1960s solution and look towards what a 2060 solution would look like for our community. And I think that would be pretty special. Thank you so much, Larissa. And thanks everyone for joining in. And I'll look forward to seeing you same time next Tuesday. Bye.
Authorised by Kylea Tink, North Sydney, New South Wales.